Hello everyone, welcome back. Happy New Year to all. Let's get started. In the upcoming videos, we'll examine how to integrate Azure services like Service Bus, Event Hub, and HTTP-triggered Function as a service endpoints to deliver the data from Dataverse. You might be wondering, why do we need to do this? What is the use of this integration? By integrating with these services, we are now able to decouple Power Apps and improve the stability and dependability of the application and services. Also, we can use the line of business applications from outside the Dataverse safely and effectively communicate with one another. By integrating with these services, we can maintain the corporate data synchronization between the numerous Dataverse systems or other Dataverse servers. Let's discuss what we'll be covering as a part of this Azure integration with Power Apps. We'll be talking about why Azure integration with Power Apps and what are the benefits. We also talk about the flow diagram of Azure integration with Power Apps. We'll also talk about the high-level integration steps using the plugin registration tool. We'll be using the tool called plugin registration tool so that we can create the service endpoint against these services with the Dataverse environments. We'll also cover how to install the plugin registration tool via Power Platform CLI. We'll talk about the main differences between the Azure Service Bus Event Hub, and also we'll talk about the webhooks. In the following videos, we'll see a demo of how to create the service endpoint for the services like Service Bus, Event Hub, and HTTP-triggered Azure Function against the Dataverse environments. Let's get started. In order to showcase the demo for Azure integration with these services, we have created a sample model-driven app with the account entity. It's just a blank app with the account entity. So whenever a user creates a new item in the account entity, the newly created account details will be sent as a message to each of these services. Once the message is reached to each of these services, a listener third-party services will listen to these messages and process the data based on the business needs. For the sake of the demo, we created the third-party services listeners via the Power Automate and Azure functions against the service bus. So we will cover in the upcoming videos how to create the service endpoints for the Azure Service Bus queue, and how to create the service endpoint for the webhook, and how to create the service endpoint for the Azure Event Hub. The listener part will be covered only for the service bus for the demo, because it will be same for the webhooks and Event Hub. Only the implementation scenario will be different, but the basic concept will remains the same. Let's consider this as a model-driven app. So whenever the user add an item to the account entity via the form, the message of the newly added item will be sent via the service endpoint to the Azure Service Bus queue. So once the message has been reached to the Azure Service Bus queue, the listeners will pick the message from the Azure Service Bus queue via the third-party services, and it will process the message based on the business needs. The business needs may be for the transaction purposes or logging purposes, or it may be for synchronizing the data between the Dataverse environments or servers. With the help of these Azure services, we can effectively communicate the data between one Dataverse to other Dataverse. Let's talk about the high-level steps we'll be doing in the demo. We'll be creating the Azure Service Bus, Azure Event Hub, and webhook HTTP-triggered Azure Function as a webhook in the Azure portal manually. So once we created these in the Azure portal, we'll copy the necessary connection strings and we'll be moving to the plugin registration tool for creating the new service endpoint. So in order to register a new service endpoint against the Dataverse environment, we need to have a tool called plugin registration tool. We'll install this plugin registration tool via Power Platform CLI. This plugin registration tool is used to register these services as a service endpoint. Whenever changes happen to the Dataverse entities, we can send the message via this service endpoint to the Azure services. Next is a register step. In this register step, that Dataverse needs to know exact operation like the table or the message combination, whether the message should be sent as a JSON or the message is a post response, and what's need to be processed and when needs to be processed. So all these details will be registering against in a register step against the service endpoint. Let's say we have created a new Azure Service Bus. So you need to register a step against the Azure Service Bus in order to process the message and send it to the Azure Service Bus whenever some changes has been happened to the Dataverse entities. So once we register the step, we need to trigger the action. So this trigger action will be done via the model driven app. So we can go to the model driven app and create a new item in the accounts table, and this will trigger the action. This will send the message to the respective service endpoints. So once the action has been sent, once the message has been sent to the respective endpoints, we need to go to the Azure portal against the services and we'll verify whether the JSON response has been received successfully. Normally, the external line of business applications will be listening to these Azure services for the new messages. So whenever messages has been reached to these Azure services, this external cloud line of business applications will pick the messages and perform the business needs. For the sake of the demo, we created a Power Automate and Azure function to pick the messages from the service bus. We'll be seeing the high-level overview of Azure Event Hub and Azure Service Bus. In future, we will be creating a separate video for the Azure Service Bus and Azure Event Hub in a detailed manner. But for the sake of this demo, we'll be covering only the high-level overview and some of the integration options. First, let's talk about the Azure Event Hubs. Azure Event Hub is a data streaming service that streamlines the data pipeline for the users, allowing them to catch a better look at the insights received from various locations. It receives and processes millions of events per second with high throughput and low latency. Azure Event Hubs is used for decoupling multiple event producers from event receivers. Event Hub is one of the messaging systems in Azure that provides a key capability of multiple sender-receiver concept. Event Hubs also has unique ability to inject massive volume of data, 1 million messages per second, with an unmatchable speed. With Event Hub, we can easily incorporate Azure services like Stream Analytics, Power BI, Azure Storage. Some of the common scenarios where Event Hub plays a crucial role is logging and telemetry, data archiving, capturing and storing the data in Azure Storage, and transaction processing. Let's talk about Azure Service Bus. Azure Service Bus acts as a messaging backbone for any application available in the cloud. So with the Azure Service Bus, we can connect to any devices, application or services running in the cloud to any other applications or services and transfer data between them. The data transferred can be XML, JSON or text format. The Service Bus namespace is the heart of the Azure Service Bus. It serves as the application container and has the ability to hold multiple queues and topics. The common scenarios to implement Service Bus are messaging. Messaging allows users to transfer business data. Another scenario is to decouple applications. It helps users to improve the reliability and scalability of the applications. Azure Service Bus relies on the following two concepts: queues and topics. Queues works based on the one-to-one communication model. It enables you to store messages until the receiver is available to receive and process them. Topics in the Service Bus works as one-to-many communication model. There will be multiple subscribers on the receiving side who can access the same message passed by the sender. Azure Service Bus can integrate with Azure Functions, Azure Logic Apps, and Azure Event Grid, Stream Analytics, and Dynamic 365. The cost model for the Azure Service Bus varies according to the pricing tier. We have basic tier, standard tier, and premium or dedicated tier. Both Azure Event Hub and Service Bus have a unique architecture advantage and are built for certain purposes. Azure Event Hubs focuses more on event streaming, whereas Azure Service Bus is more focused on high-value enterprise messaging. If you are implementing a pattern which uses request reply message, then probably you need to consider Azure Service Bus. Event hubs are more likely to be used for the implementation of event messages. If you want a reliable event ingester which can deal a massive scale of event messages, then we should prefer event hubs. Let's talk about the key differences between the webhook and Azure Service Bus integrations. So before integrating with Azure services like the webhook and Azure Service Bus, we need to keep some of the points in mind. Like Azure Service Bus works for high scale processing and provides a full queue mechanism if the Dataverse is pushing many events, whereas webhook can only scale to a point at which the hosted web service can handle the message. Webhook enables synchronous and asynchronous steps, whereas Azure Service Bus only allows asynchronous steps. Webhook sends post requests with JSON payload and can be consumed by any programming language or web application hosted anywhere. Both webhooks and Azure Service Bus can be invoked from a plugin or via a custom workflow activity. We also discussed about the key differences, key scenarios, integration options available for the Azure Service Bus and Event Hubs. All these details are listed in this table. Please have a look. So far we have seen the benefits of Azure integration with Power Apps, how the Azure integration makes the Power App as a decoupled one, and the flow diagram of Azure integration with Power Apps, high-level steps of integration using the plugin registration tool, and the high-level overview of Azure services like the Service Bus and Event Hub. We also discussed the key differences between the webhooks and Service Bus and Event Hub. In the upcoming video, in the part 2 of the video, we'll be showing a demo of how to integrate these services with the Power Apps. Catch you in the next part. Thank you.